My name is Grace. I'm 36 years old, and this is how I took revenge on the woman who said I could never be a mother. While my son sat right beside me. It happened on a warm fall evening, at one of those mandatory family dinners where everyone pretends to like each other over to dry turkey and chardonnay. I'd brought my son, Jonah. He was 6, sweet, shy, and always clung to my side in crowds. We'd barely made it through the front door before I felt the tension, the stares, the fake smiles. I told myself it was fine. I'd survived worse. Dinner was halfway through. The adults were locked in shallow conversation about real estate and someone's new Tesla. Jonah sat quietly beside me, drawing on his napkin with a blue crayon I kept in my purse. And then, right as I reached for the butter dish, it happened. My Aunt Linda, sharp-tongued, immaculately dressed, and proud of her cruelty, fixed her eyes on me and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It's a miracle Grace is even here." We all thought she'd grow old and alone. Definitely no kids. That womb gave up, didn't it? The sound of forks hitting plates echoed like a gunshot. My heart pounded. Jonah froze. I looked down and saw him blinking up at me, confused, unsure, waiting to see how I'd react. I wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. Years of heartbreak, fertility treatments, miscarriages, sleepless nights, tears soaked into hospital pillows. All of it rushed back like a tidal wave. And now, the one person who made me whole, my son, my miracle, had to sit there and hear this venom directed at his mother like a joke. I swallowed hard, steadied my voice, and said, "Excuse us," as I gently took Jonah's hand and left the room. I smiled at him so he wouldn't worry, but inside, I was shaking. In the bathroom, I crouched down, brushed his hair back, and said, "You did nothing wrong, baby." He just nodded, still quiet. I should have let it go, kept the peace. But she didn't just insult me. She humiliated me in front of my son. And in that moment, something changed. That's when I knew this wasn't over. My name is Grace. I'm 36 years old, and this is how I took revenge on the woman who said I could never be a mother. While my son sat right beside me. It happened on a warm fall evening, at one of those mandatory family dinners where everyone pretends to like each other over to dry turkey and chardonnay. I'd brought my son, Jonah. He was 6, sweet, shy, and always clung to my side in crowds. We'd barely made it through the front door before I felt the tension, the stares, the fake smiles. I told myself it was fine. I'd survived worse. Dinner was halfway through. The adults were locked in shallow conversation about real estate and someone's new Tesla. Jonah sat quietly beside me, drawing on his napkin with a blue crayon I kept in my purse. And then, right as I reached for the butter dish, it happened. My Aunt Linda, sharp-tongued, immaculately dressed, and proud of her cruelty, fixed her eyes on me and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It's a miracle Grace is even here." We all thought she'd grow old and alone. Definitely no kids. That womb gave up, didn't it? The sound of forks hitting plates echoed like a gunshot. My heart pounded. Jonah froze. I looked down and saw him blinking up at me, confused, unsure, waiting to see how I'd react. I wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. Years of heartbreak, fertility treatments, miscarriages, sleepless nights, tears soaked into hospital pillows. All of it rushed back like a tidal wave. And now, the one person who made me whole, my son, my miracle, had to sit there and hear this venom directed at his mother like a joke. I swallowed hard, steadied my voice, and said, "Excuse us," as I gently took Jonah's hand and left the room. I smiled at him so he wouldn't worry, but inside, I was shaking in the bathroom. I crouched down, brushed his hair back, and said, "You did nothing wrong, baby." He just nodded, still quiet. I should have let it go, kept the peace. But she didn't just insult me. She humiliated me in front of my son. And in that moment, something changed. That's when I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, the sun was barely up when Jonah crawled into bed beside me, his small hand curling into mine. He was quiet, which was unusual. Normally, he'd be chatting about dinosaurs or asking for pancakes. But this time, he just looked at me with those wide, curious eyes and asked, "Mommy, is your tummy broken? Did you not want me at first?" I froze. I don't know how long I stared at him, but my heart shattered in a way I hadn't felt since the miscarriage, since the doctor told me I couldn't carry, since the silence in those waiting rooms swallowed me whole. But this pain was different. It wasn't about me. It was about him. My son, the one I fought so hard to love fully and completely. Now wondering if he was ever wanted, if he had been a backup plan, a consolation prize. I pulled him into my arms and held him as tightly as I could. "Baby," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You were always meant to be mine. I didn't grow you in my tummy. I grew you in my heart. And my heart is the strongest thing I have." He nodded slowly, but I could see he didn't fully understand. He was 6, but the seed had been planted. That ugly, poisonous seed of doubt. And I knew exactly who had planted it. Linda. All those years of her sideways jabs, the not-so-subtle commentary, the pity disguised as concern. I had spent over a decade swallowing her cruelty, laughing off her remarks, pretending I didn't care. I told myself I was above it, that I was the bigger person, that she didn't matter. But now her words had reached the one place I'd sworn to protect. And it wasn't just an insult anymore. It was an invasion. She didn't just shame me. She tried to unmake my motherhood. She tried to pull apart the most sacred thing I had built. Not just my identity as a mother, but my son's sense of security, of belonging, of truth. And something inside me snapped. Something old. Something buried under years of forced grace and polite silence. For the first time, I let myself feel it fully. The white-hot rage, the righteous, protective fury of a mother who had been shamed, dismissed, and pitied for too long. I tucked Jonah in with his favorite stuffed dinosaur, kissed his forehead, and promised him pancakes. But in my mind, something entirely different was cooking. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for respect. I was going to show Aunt Linda, and everyone like her, that I wasn't just a mother. I was a storm, and she'd forgotten what happened when you stand too smugly in the open. That night, after Jonah was asleep, Grace sat across from Eli at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, dimly lit, the kind of silence that used to bring her peace. Now it felt like pressure, building, tight, thick in her chest. She told him everything. What Linda said, how Jonah reacted, the ache it reopened inside her. Eli sighed, ran his hand over his jaw. "She's always been like this, Grace. She wants a reaction. Why give her one now?" But it wasn't about a reaction. Not anymore. Grace shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "It's not just about me. She humiliated me in front of Jonah. He thinks he wasn't wanted, that he's not enough. I won't let that sit in his little heart, Eli. I won't let that woman stain the one pure thing in my life." He reached across the table, held her hand. "Then do what you need to do, but don't lose yourself to her cruelty." That night, Grace sat on the floor of the guest room, the one where boxes of her past still lived. Journals, hospital wristbands, photos from the years she fought to conceive, letters she never sent. There was one in particular she couldn't forget, a note from Aunt Linda, sent after her third failed IVF attempt. It said, "Some women just aren't meant to be mothers, Grace. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Some people are better as aunts or dog moms." Grace had burned with shame back then. She remembered hearing Linda at a family brunch, glass of champagne in hand, toasting her daughter's pregnancy by saying, "Some women are born to carry life. Others just aren't." Grace had smiled. She always smiled. She swallowed every insult, every micro-humiliation, every sit-along glance and weaponized pity. Until now, this wasn't about revenge. This was about truth, about boundaries, about reclaiming something that had been stolen from her piece by piece, her worth, as she sorted through old memories. Grace stumbled on something else, a series of emails between her mother and an old cousin. Back when family gossip still traveled by keyboard, they talked about Linda's husband's affair years ago. Apparently, he had fathered a child with someone else during their marriage. And there were rumors, nothing ever confirmed, that Linda's youngest daughter wasn't his, that the timelines didn't add up, that the baby looked different. Grace stared at the screen, heart pounding. She didn't want to hurt Linda's daughter. She wasn't the target. But the irony was brutal. Linda had spent decades policing Grace's womanhood and questioning her motherhood, while keeping a secret of her own. It wasn't about scandal. It was about hypocrisy, about the cracks in the porcelain life Linda pretended to have, while throwing stones at Grace for having any mess of her own. An idea began to form. Not petty, not loud, just true. Grace would host her own family dinner, a small one, intimate. She'd cook, she'd decorate, she'd invite them with warmth. No one would suspect a thing, and at the heart of it, she'd do two things: speak her truth and hold up a mirror, not to shame, but to show, to reveal, to make Linda finally see the damage she caused, not with rage, but with clarity. But even as the plan unfolded in her mind, Grace felt the knot in her chest grow tighter. What if I become like her? What if standing up for myself turned into vengeance? What if Jonah saw his mother turning cold, sharp, weaponizing words like Linda did? She sat at her desk the next morning and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. Then she began to write a letter to Jonah. She wrote about the day she met him, how his eyes met hers in the agency waiting room, how she knew, instantly, that her heart had found its missing piece. She wrote about how she used to cry in hospital parking lots, feeling empty, how the first time he called her mom, the emptiness disappeared. She told him, in every word, that he was not a replacement or a second choice, but the answer to a question her soul had asked for years. She cried as she wrote, but not because she was broken, because for the first time, she was whole. This wasn't about becoming Linda. This was about becoming the woman she had needed when she was younger, and the mother Jonah needed now. Not a woman who stayed silent, not a woman who swallowed shame, but one who stood, gently and firmly, in the full light of her story, and made no apologies for it. The dining room glowed with candlelight and soft laughter as the extended family gathered around Grace's long oak table, passing platters of roasted vegetables and pouring wine into mismatched glasses. It was a rare moment, the entire family together. No weddings or funerals involved. Just an invitation from Grace. Out of the blue. A Mother's Day appreciation dinner. Everyone had been surprised to receive it. Some raised eyebrows. Some chuckled privately. But curiosity had brought them all. Grace, the woman who'd once been pitied, dismissed, even whispered about, now welcoming everyone with calm elegance and homemade food. That smelled like memory. Linda sat at the center of the table, as always, flanked by her perfectly polished children and wearing her usual air of curated superiority. She had smirked when she walked in, scanning Grace's modest home as if to rate it. "You've done well for yourself," she'd said, her tone a little too pointed. Grace had smiled. "Thank you. I have." The meal passed with the usual chit-chat, vacations, work, aging parents. But midway through dessert, Grace stood. She tapped her glass once. The room hushed. "I just want to say something," she began, voice even, clear. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating mothers. It's about honoring every kind of motherhood. The kind that's inherited, the kind that's chosen, the kind that's fought for, bled for, and sometimes the kind that isn't seen at all." The room shifted. Chairs straightened. Eyebrows lifted. Grace took a breath, steadying herself. "Some of you know parts of my story. Most of you don't. I spent years trying to become a mother. I went through surgeries, hormones, heartbreak, and quiet grief you can't imagine. And when I couldn't carry a child, I carried the shame instead." She looked around the room. Faces softened. Her cousin wiped away a tear. "But then I met Jonah. I didn't grow him in my body, but from the moment I held him, he grew inside my heart. And I have been his mother in every way that counts." Her voice trembled, just for a moment, before she gathered herself. "I tell you this not for sympathy. I tell you this because I want to be very clear. Motherhood is not a bloodline. It's not a trophy. It's not a biological rite of passage. It's love. It's sacrifice. It's showing up, over and over, when no one claps for you." Then she turned and looked directly at Linda, and to the women who believe motherhood is biology. "I forgive you, but your cruelty isn't forgotten." The air turned thick. You could hear the silverware still. Linda's face hardened. She opened her mouth. "Grace, this is..." But Grace raised a hand, unshaken. "I'm not finished." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Jonah wrote me this after I told him how he came into my life. I didn't ask him to, but he wanted to say something." She unfolded the letter and read. Voice clear. "Mommy, I don't care if you grew me or not. I choose you every day." A hush fell over the room. Someone gasped. A chair creaked. Grace looked up. "You once told me I'd never be a mother, that I should give up, that my womb had failed. But I'm standing here today, not broken, not bitter. A mother, a whole one." Her eyes never left Linda's. "And you're sitting there, alone. So who really lost?" Silence. Then a clap. It came from the far end of the table. Then another, and another. One by one, family members applauded. Some nodded through tears. A few looked away. Ashamed, Linda stood, face flushed red with fury, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the room without a word. Grace didn't flinch. She folded Jonah's letter carefully, tucked it back into her purse and sat down beside Eli. He reached for her hand beneath the table, gave it a gentle squeeze. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. The truth had been spoken, and it echoed louder than any insult ever had. Weeks pass, and the waves from that dinner still ripple through the family. Grace hears from a cousin that Linda's been telling everyone she was ambushed, that the speech was a public attack meant to humiliate her. But for the first time, those stories fall flat. People aren't buying it anymore. Something shifted that night. A veil lifted. Grace starts getting quiet messages from relatives she hadn't heard from in years. A cousin in Texas writes, "I wish I'd spoken up too. You were brave." Another, tearfully, confesses she had a miscarriage last year, and Linda mocked her too, called it nature's filter. Grace reads that message over and over, hands trembling, realizing this wasn't just about her. It never was. With Ellie's encouragement, she starts writing again. What begins as a personal journal becomes a public blog. She shares the raw truth about infertility, about adoption, about shame and survival. The blog gains traction, first with local moms, then national forums. She receives letters from women who say, "You made me feel seen, and thank you for giving words to what I couldn't say." Grace, once silenced by fear and judgment, is now a voice others rely on. At home, Jonah starts therapy, not because he's broken, but because Grace wants him to have every tool she didn't. He begins to thrive. He draws pictures of their family, always with Grace front and center. He tells his classmates proudly, "I was chosen." His light grows stronger. Grace watches him, and every time she doubts herself, he reminds her exactly why she stood up that night. Grace no longer skips family gatherings. She walks in, shoulders back, holding Jonah's hand. People treat her differently now, not just with respect, but with acknowledgement. They see her, not as a cautionary tale or a pitied outsider, as a woman who reclaimed her voice. Linda is still cold, distant, but she doesn't speak out anymore. She doesn't have to be silenced. The truth already did that for her. Grace realizes she doesn't want revenge anymore. She wants peace, and she has it. The best revenge wasn't hurting her, Grace thinks. Watching Jonah laugh under a tree one afternoon, it was living free of her shame and raising a child who will never carry it. 1 year later, Grace walks hand in hand with Jonah into the same upscale restaurant where everything changed. The same polished floors, the same glimmering light fixtures, the same corner booth where her heart once shattered in front of her entire family. But tonight, the air feels different, lighter. She and Jonah slide into the booth, and she watches him, taller now, more confident, his eyes still full of the wonder that saved her. She asks softly, "Do you remember this place?" Jonah glances round, then smiles. "Yeah, it's where you